So I'd like to welcome everyone to the launch of a timely and important report that's being released 1 year after Russia's ghastly full-blown attack on Ukraine. And I think it's fair to say that Ukraine has emerged as a leader in a number of important domains over the course of the year, including one such critical domain, which is its leadership in countering the Kremlin's industrial-scale dissembling. So the report we're releasing today is looking both at Ukraine's role in this, but also key countries in Central Europe and the Baltic states that have really led the way in helping to understand and respond to the Kremlin's global information ambitions. And I'm just so pleased that we have both contributors to the report and other experts who are able to join us. This report, titled Shielding Democracy, dissects how the Ukrainians and their partners in the region have used new forms of cooperation, technological advances, and other measures to level up their game and hit these problems at a much higher level. I want to take this moment also to acknowledge the fine work of my colleague, Adam Fivenson, who was supported and helped by colleagues John Glenn and Kevin Shives and Josie Broadfuhr and others on the team. I'm also pleased that we're joined today by contributors to the report, both Adam and also Veronika Víchová, Olha Bilousenko, and we have comments from Peter Pomerantsev. And so without further ado, I'm now going to turn over to our moderator, my colleague, Irina Smolina. So over to you, Irina.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good morning and good afternoon to those who join us from other time zones. It is a true pleasure to moderate today's event. Kremlin's information warfare is not new, as it dates back to the beginning of the Cold War Soviet propaganda and political warfare. And as Chris has mentioned, the groundwork for Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine a year ago was seeded by a mass disinformation campaign that continues to be ongoing as part of Kremlin's hybrid warfare in Ukraine and targets both Ukraine and other open democracies. The Soviet Cold War time propaganda exponed with the use of technology, and civil society and media organizations have found themselves rapidly adapting to the situation despite all the challenges. Today we'll hear from two of our partners, one from Ukraine, another one from the Czech Republic. But in Ukraine, the National Endowment for Democracy has been working for a long time, and we have more than 100 partners who continue operating in the country, demonstrating extraordinary courage, creativity, and resilience as they document egregious human rights violations for accountability and truth-telling, volunteer to help revitalize war-affected communities, counter misinformation and disinformation, but who also remain committed to supporting anti-corruption, rule of law reforms, and media independence. Today's report, as Chris mentioned, highlights how Ukraine and Central and Eastern European countries are at the forefront of responding to disinformation challenges globally. And I would like to invite one of the report's authors, Adam Fivenson, Senior Program Officer for Information Space Integrity and the International Forum for Democratic Studies, to introduce the report and to share a few highlights from it.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Irina. I really appreciate it. So the forum's work in the information space is really twofold. First, we're focused on understanding how malign actors are leveraging a world where perceptions are increasingly mediated through digital systems and thus more vulnerable to manipulation to attack democratic institutions around the globe. And secondly, we're exploring how democratic actors, particularly civil society organizations, are establishing credibility, restoring integrity, and building resilience in the information space around the globe to strengthen democracy, in addition to looking for ways that we can accelerate the diffusion of such approaches to other contexts where democracies are similarly challenged by disinformation and other forms of information space manipulation. Today's conversation really fits into the second category, as does the report that we're here to launch, as Chris mentioned, which is titled Shielding Democracy, Civil Society Adaptations to Kremlin Disinformation about Ukraine. This report represents the forum's understanding of the critical elements of the democratic response to the Kremlin's ongoing multi-headed disinformation campaign about the full-scale invasion. working closely with civil society organizations, as Irina mentioned, across Ukraine and Central and Eastern Europe, where democratic societies have been targeted by Moscow's efforts to divide, to confuse, and to dodge accountability. The forum hosted a series of expert convenings and conducted more than 50 interviews over the past 8 months to hear, in the words of activists, strategists, and journalists, how they've responded to the Kremlin's disinformation about the full-scale invasion, as well as what they think has worked in responding and why they think those measures have worked, or rather what it means to counter a malign narrative. The report really highlights 3 key themes that arose from these conversations. First, the importance of preparation and the evolution of the response since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Secondly, the critical nature of networks of cooperation across Ukraine and Central and Eastern Europe. And third, the certain critical innovations, such as the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to more quickly detect emergent disinformation campaigns across an information ecosystem that is complex and ever evolving. So just a few more words on each of these before I pass it over to some of my fellow authors. First of all, on the importance of preparation, as Galina Petrenko of Detector Media explains in the report, the period of 2014 to 2022 represented a critical stage of development for the counter-disinformation community in Ukraine and around Central and Eastern Europe. During that time, their ability to coordinate, to build essential response mechanisms really matured, starting with fact-checking efforts, evolving over time toward narrative research, community education, and media literacy, and more recently to the use, as I've mentioned, of artificial intelligence and machine learning methods to more rapidly detect emergent narratives. This sort of emerging critical mass of counter-disinformation activity has had the effect of greatly improving the Ukrainian public's knowledge and awareness of Russian disinformation narratives and tactics. More on that in the report. Secondly, on deepening cooperation. In an ever increasingly complex information space, civil society organizations are leveraging diverse skill sets to form cooperative networks that have the scale, the sophistication, and the speed necessary to stay ahead of the Kremlin's multi-headed propaganda machine, which is adapting its messaging strategy almost constantly. One such network is the Countering Disinformation Hub, run by the National Democratic Institute, which includes roughly 25 local civil society organizations, media organizations, international nonprofits, and journalists, and has provided a critical platform to Ukrainian civil society to share information, coordinate strategy, and design counter-messaging efforts together. And finally, returning to this theme of leveraging new technologies, artificial intelligence and machine learning tools have helped to make it easier to rapidly detect messaging patterns across a really, as we all understand, I think, a complex and evolving information ecosystem. This empowers disinformation researchers to more quickly detect emergent narratives, and it gives counter-messaging strategists more time to design an effective response before disinformation narratives can cross channels, cross platforms, and influence larger audiences. Texty is an example of an organization that's doing this. They're a data journalism operation out of Ukraine, and they've used AI and machine learning tools to detect emergent pro-Kremlin narratives across thousands of Telegram channels, where Kremlin narratives may be impactful, but otherwise difficult to identify and counter. And I'll just end by saying that the threat posed by Moscow's disinformation machine is clear. While its claims about Ukraine often defy observable reality, they are a critical component of the Kremlin's information strategy, which aims to unmoor societal perceptions from reality and undermine the very concept of noble truth. Maria Ressa, the Philippine journalist and recent Nobel Prize laureate, puts the challenge into stark relief when she says, without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, no democracy, and it becomes impossible to deal with our world's existential problems. So with that, let me pass it back to Irina and to some of my co-authors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. And now I would like to invite 2 experts from the region to share their thoughts, drawing on 2 companion essays released with the report today. And I would like to ask the viewing audience to please use this opportunity as you listen to our speakers to start posting your questions in social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We have live broadcast today. The first one to go is Olha Bilousenko, Head of Research at Detector Media in Ukraine. This is long-standing partner of the National Endowment for Democracy, and this organization has been particularly creative in the aftermath of the escalation last year. using its tools to both help Ukrainian public improve media literacy skills, but also Ukrainian government institutions heavily relied on their tools and fact-checking hub to identify networks that spread Kremlin's false narratives. So, Olha, my first question to you is, if you could start sharing with us how Ukrainian civil society has adapted to the evolving nature of Russian disinformation since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and how organizations are using new tools and approaches to respond to the Kremlin's ever-evolving information operations. Over to you.
Thank you, Irina. Detector Media has been working on Russian disinformation since 2014. Back then, we analyzed media content to identify Russian messages and narratives, challenged Russian fakes, and more. We made dossiers on Russian propagandists or Ukraine political and media figures who propagandized for Russia. In fact, both Detector Media and other civil society organizations in Ukraine, such as StopFake, VoxCheck, and others, have been fighting disinformation for many years. We cannot claim that we were fully prepared for Russia's information warfare, but we were not completely unprepared either. At Detector Media, we, as well as state institutions such as the Center for Strategic Communications or the Center for Countering Disinformation and other NGOs that have been active in the fight against disinformation for years, began responding to Russia's information attacks even before February 24. That is, we noticed a pattern of increasing disinformation attacks a few weeks before February 24. The state-run organizations that emerged as a response to Russia's information aggression before the full-scale war had a chance to demonstrate the value and effectiveness of their work. Besides, one of these organizations was headed by a former civic activist, which demonstrates the important influence of Ukrainian civil society on the evolution of the Ukrainian government's approach to countering disinformation. Ukrainian organizations that have worked to raise public awareness of Russian disinformation and its harmful impact on Ukrainians have significantly expanded their audience as part of the growing demand for Ukrainian language content on social media. The public demand for verified information has grown significantly, and the term fact-checking has become a buzzword. Next, I will tell you a little about how Detector Media and other organizations fight disinformation using cutting-edge tools. My colleagues and I also use machine learning tools to analyze social media and identify Russian disinformation. In particular, we use this approach on the Ukrainian and Russian segments of Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, and YouTube. Detector Media, we analyze numerical and textual data using libraries for statistical analysis, natural language processing, and machine learning implemented in Python. Detector Media respects the principles of privacy and security of personal data on social media. So we only analyze data that is public, that is data that the user has given permission for to be collected and processed. Each social media that we analyze, Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, has its own policies on how to obtain, process, and store data. Detector Media respects the policies of such network as well as the European Union's legislation. We get this kind of data mostly from social media, the content of public posts and responses to them, information about the time of publication of posts and replies, the number of likes and shares of posts and responses, page names of the authors of posts and replies, the number and list of subscribers and page subscriptions. Having such a comprehensive and systemic approach is crucial. I see disinformation as a major tool of warfare. Therefore, our research helps us understand the extent to which Russia uses this tool across the globe. You'll be surprised at how widely it's being used. Also, by studying other countries' media landscapes and social media, we understand how different the narratives spread by Russia propaganda about Ukraine are. We want to talk about them and build the resistance of Ukrainian society to disinformation. Of course, some of the fakes and Russian propaganda through into the information space seem absurd to us. For example, the fake news that dogs are to be mobilized to the front line in Ukraine. This is ridiculous, but it's also dangerous. When Ukrainians see such disinformation going viral, they assume that it's impossible to believe it, and it is, and they make the mistake of concluding that all Russian disinformation is like this. They start thinking that they are resistant to it, that they will never believe it, and so on. Unfortunately, this is far from the case. After all, the Russian propaganda machine produces much more serious items. It works with large narratives that it spreads to the media landscapes of multiple countries at the same time. All of this aimed at destabilizing the situation. For example, Russia is promoting the narrative that there is no war in Ukraine because the Ukrainian government has not officially declared it, implying that it's so not ready to recognize that what is happening in the country is a war. This is very complex and long-standing message of Russian propaganda, which has several goals at once. In particular, it discredits the Ukrainian government, makes Ukrainians distrustful of it, and thus increases public discontent in Ukraine during a very real war. This is highly dangerous. We seek to counteract these exact hostile and complex messages in our work, so we focus not only on identifying them, but also on explaining how they work, why Russia uses them, and more. This knowledge will help the audience to understand better how the Russian propaganda machine works and truly increase resistance to disinformation.
Thank you, Olha. Disinformation has truly become one of the major concerns in European countries, and now we'll hear from another partner of ours, Veronika Víchová, Deputy Director for Analysis and Head of the Kremlin Watch program at the European Values Center for Security Policy. And Veronika, we invite you to please share your insights about the efforts of civil society around Eastern and Central European countries in support of Ukraine. Over to you.
Thank you, and it's nice to be here at this panel today. My main point that I would like to share today, and that I was also with my colleague Andrei Poleshchuk trying to make in the essay, is the following. I believe and I argue that civil society in Central and Eastern Europe has actually been, since 2014 onwards, a driver of the systematic response towards disinformation and information operations. But the less optimistic point that I have is that actions of civil society, while very often being extremely innovative and progressive, are not enough. to stand against this threat, because after all, we are really facing very complex, very hostile state-sponsored machinery. So let me elaborate on that a little bit more. I think in 2014 and partly in 2015, civil society really was the first actor, with honorable exceptions, that started to understand the threat, what it looks like, why it's dangerous, and started to raise awareness about it. And I think that civil society here really learned quite a lot from Ukraine and Ukrainian situation and Ukrainian civil society organizations in this field. Many of those areas were already mentioned and described. In the beginning, it was very often fact-checking, debunking, and generally monitoring disinformation, where I think organizations like Detector Media or Stop Fake or already mentioned Texty were a great inspiration for many older but also new organizations which started to focus on this and try to fact check in such a way that it would actually reach the correct audiences. While fact checking, I think, is not the silver bullet solution to everything, it's very important for increasing our knowledge about what we are actually facing and how the propaganda machinery works. We also learned from Ukrainian civil society a lot about awareness raising and advocacy. Organization like Ukraine Crisis Media Center taught us quite a lot about how to conduct campaigns so that people understand what Russian propaganda looks like and what are its goals, and also how to advocate about it towards our target audiences. Last but not least, the experience of Ukraine since 2014 and afterwards also helped us advocate in other Central and Western European capitals. Because we were showing this example as something that could also happen elsewhere, and that we have to be prepared for this problem, because it's not just a problem of Ukraine or Eastern Partnership countries, it's also a problem of our own national security. Despite these efforts that I think many civil society organizations and think tanks had, I would argue that various countries in Europe woke up to this threat very differently. While Baltic states or countries like Poland or some of the Scandinavian countries understood the problem quite quickly, there are also Western capitals which really for a long time were not necessarily denying, but underestimating the problem. In this situation, what many civil society organizations started doing is really building communities with individuals, organizations, and institutions which try to understand where we stand. So we have been spending many years building communities and connecting and exchanging information with journalists, media organizations, other security experts or NGOs, but also individuals in state institutions, politicians, who wanted to know more about this and who wanted to prepare their societies and their countries against any kind of disinformation campaigns or manipulations. I think that's one of the reasons why also civil society was less surprised last year when Russia actually invaded Ukraine on a full scale than some of the governments, because we have been expecting that the situation is probably going to get worse. It doesn't necessarily mean we were fully prepared, but at least we had these networks that we have been building for a really long time to mobilize them and to respond fairly fast to this new coming threat that was very relevant for our own security, again, not just for Ukraine. We have also started working quite a lot with Ukrainian experts who had to leave Ukraine after the invasion, and using their knowledge even more to not only learn, but also, again, to advocate for helping Ukraine, explaining what exactly is happening there, and also using their insight to, let's say, influence the information space and provide fact-based analytical insight into what is necessary and what Ukrainians actually need right now from different parts of European societies. Finally, I would like to say that throughout the years, it really became obvious that the, let's say, level of countries' ability to counter disinformation really correlates very strongly with the opportunity and ability of governments and civil society organizations to work together. It can't be one or the other. The threat is complex. It affects us on many societal levels, and we have to be able to respond adequately. And in cases where governments are in denial or are even maybe helping Russian interests, it's very difficult for civil society to have impact in such a way that it actually changes the situation. And I think the reason for this is that this, let's say, effort to counter disinformation is not just in using AI and quick fact-checking. While it's important, I think the biggest fight that we have is about being able to build and sustain trust into democratic institutions, into democratic society. And we are not able to do that without these institutions actually trying to be trustworthy, which is why we need this cooperation in order to actually build resilience against Russian influence. Obviously, there are cases where the governments are not friendly towards these efforts. And I think in these cases, international networks and cooperation are crucial to play this role of a safety net for organizations which really work in hostile environments. But otherwise, I think the role of state institutions are really crucial, and they have to talk to civil society and to media, and they have to work together, because I think that otherwise we will not be able to move forward as much as we would like. And actually, we will not even be able to help Ukraine effectively without this kind of cooperation. I will not elaborate into too much detail on this. I really hope we will get into more details in the discussion later on. So thank you.
Thank you, Veronika. And we are also very pleased to be joined by Peter Pomerantsev, who needs a little introduction to many in the audience today. He's a global authority on countering Russian disinformation and the author of numerous defining books and articles on these challenges, and is currently based at Johns Hopkins University. And Peter, we'd like you to share your thoughts on the findings in the report, as well as the broader implications for the democracies of Ukraine's efforts to counter Russia's malign influence in the information space.
Yeah, well, what I found so encouraging in this report is that I think I can see, and I think we're seeing, the emergence organically, really, of a much more structured and long-term response to what Russia calls information warfare. And we know what Russia and what China do. We've studied them a lot now. You know, we know their mix of troll farms and conspiracy baiting state media and wolf warriors. We know the playbook very, very well. And I think the question has always haunted me is what should our version be? What's the democratic response? They have their info war. What is the democratic communications infrastructure that can respond to this? Historically, that has existed. In the Second World War, the British had the political warfare executive, embracing everything from the BBC through to leaflets to counter Nazi propaganda. In the Cold War, you had the US Information Agency, but we live in a different world now. Those institutions and those sort of setups don't really fit our world. We live in a world where civil society, marketing companies, independent researchers can do so much more than government, move so much faster. And I think what we're seeing is the emergence of what this coalition needs to involve. And I think Veronika was also talking about moving towards this as well in her conversation. We're seeing from this report very clearly already coordination between some of the building blocks we'll need, analyzing what the malign actors are doing, some social research to see whether it's actually working, and then the start of some sort of lobbying towards and advocacy towards government. I think as we move forward, and I think we really have to do this over this next year, where the information part will become as important as the military part, I feel. Yeah, as Russia will ramp up its various levers of influence, and where there will be this fear of stagnation in the war in Ukraine, the sense that it's going nowhere, that we can't help Ukraine any further. And then all these narratives around peace getting Ukraine to agree will re-emerge very strongly over this year. We're going to have a very tough year. And the information influence space will be very, very important. But I think this is a real need to build on what we see in the report and take it further. So clearly, there are amazing institutions doing fantastic analysis of what the Russians are up to. There's a start on a communications pushback through debunking and so on. There's some social research, there's some communication with government. I think that has to be over the next year, institutionalized much, much, much stronger. I think we have to move in the communication space from a reactive mode, which I think we're still trapped in, to something much more positive. How do we start pushing the positive messages? And I don't just mean journalism, I mean advocacy, I mean campaigns. How do we start partnering with the Ukrainian communicators who are giving positive messages? I mean, institutions like UNIC or United 24. Let's widen the circle of communicators from just the debunking or to the ones doing positive campaigns as well. Let's have social research, which is not just giving us one-off bits and pieces about, oh, what do people think about Ukraine? But just like in a political campaign, have a segmentation, target audience, constantly checking messages, constantly getting feedback, constantly seeing what's working, constantly feeding that to the political allies that we have. And I would maybe focus on 1, 2, or 3 countries. In Germany, we have very strong allies in the Greens who are desperate for this sort of information. I've spoken to them quite a lot, both anecdotally and in more structured ways. They would appreciate understanding what messages worked, what the Russians are up to. Then I would also partner it with another activity that Ned is very supportive of in its other work, which is the work around investigations to do with kleptocracy and sanctions busting. Yeah, let's bring these bits together. Russia thinks of this as one thing, influencing through economic, through business, through information, through energy. We're still working in silos. We will never compete until we start bringing that together. But let's make sure that those investigations are targeted. Currently, the investigation space is very, very diffuse. You'll have the Panama Papers, which just do stuff about very generally about, about shell companies and tax havens. That's very important. I don't mean we should stop that, but right now we need targeted investigations into the bits of the Russian economy which are the most exposed and the most vulnerable, to in their dependence on illicit contact with the West. So over the next year, and I think we have already this in an embryonic form in this report, which is why I was so inspired reading it. If we can bring together the social research, the communications piece, the investigations, and the advocacy and communication with political allies, then I think we will finally be in a place where we can really, really punch harder than the Russian information warfare machine. Again, I would maybe focus on 2 or 3 key countries or 2 or 3 key narratives to make that really, really tangible. But I'm so encouraged this is happening anyway. People are looking for each other, they're finding each other, they're understanding how they can complement their research and their talents. And I think we're moving in the right direction. I just feel it's going to be a really heavy year or 2 years probably. So now is the time to really scale up.
Thank you so much, Peter. And these building blocks are really critical. Fully agree with you. Now we have 18 minutes left, and we'd like to ask some questions from the audience, which is the main part of this event, I would say. So one question is, are there information initiatives specifically focused on reaching Russia's heartland population? Олю, для вас перекладу питання від аудиторії. Які є інформаційні ініціативи, які спрямовані на населення Росії? I would open this floor to the 3 speakers, because I think all 3 of you can provide excellent input. Please, who would like to start us off? Maybe Veronika, because I think your center truly has great products that targets Russian influences.
Well, I would maybe say that our focus as actually, if I understood the question correctly, our organization is not focused on targeting Russian audiences inside Russia. We are mostly focused on advocacy activities inside Europe. So I don't know if I can actually provide enough insight in this area, but if somebody asked me if there are any information initiatives which are targeting Russian language populations and are doing it effectively, I would actually again turn to our Ukrainian friends and colleagues who I think have been doing it, be it on the previously occupied territories or even now. They're the ones who are actually very often able to reach cross-border and come up with very innovative ways of how to keep these audiences, let's say, provided by or with fact-based information, not only coming from Russian state propaganda.
Thank you so much. Peter, would you like to comment from your deep background on that?
So there's not enough being done in this direction, in my opinion. Ukrainians are trying more than anyone else because they understand that information campaigns are, are grinding down the Russian war machine, undermining mobilization, undermining people's dependence on the government is very important when you're fighting a war. My sense is that a little bit like with the hardcore weapons, when some Ukrainians, the ones I know of, and obviously I don't know everything, have sought more structured assistance in this area from Western partners, there's frankly just not enough assistance for this to really work properly, given the really high barriers that you have to face, both technologically, but also psychologically. You really have to do this on a great scale for it to start making inroads beyond just eating away at the fringes of maybe, I don't know, targeting soldiers or something, which I'm sure is being done by the military. So I really feel that this is very important. Sadly, I feel there's a distinct lack of will and appetite to do that among political decision makers in London and DC and among most donors. I think, again, it might be down to civil society to prove that this can have an important effect, that this has a certain political theory of change, not just an engagement theory of change. And then maybe if civil society can establish that, the political will might appear. I think the sense is that Putin's got the country locked down, why bother? In one sentence seems to be a lot of the attitude, like, what will we change? If with a limited amount of resources, what will this do when we should be focusing on Germany, Slovakia, India, Brazil, places where we can have a tangible impact? I don't think that's right. I think that's very short-termist. I think that changing perceptions that lead to a change in political calculation in Russia is absolutely critical. And I've never heard of a war, whether a hot or a cold one, where information doesn't play a critical role.
Thank you so much. And I believe Adam has a comment on this one too.
Just quickly, and not to counteract anything that Peter would have just said, but in terms of the report itself, we were a bit more focused on understanding the lessons from the Ukrainian side that might be applicable in other contexts around the world, particularly in backsliding democracies. We, or at least I very much respect, the challenge that Peter is describing, to echo, things that I've heard about, what a significant challenge it is. In terms of influencing and reaching into the Russian information ecosystem. But just to sort of bring us back, to the focus of the report itself and thinking about, what are the ways that some of these lessons and things that we've been hearing, from organizations that are doing the work in Ukraine, that are doing those, really challenging work around Central and Eastern Europe, how can we sort of apply those lessons in other contexts, particularly, non-conflict environments? I think that's one of the challenges and one of the questions that NET itself was working on answering. Folks, among our grant making and programmatic teams that are thinking very deeply, about ways that we can sort of take some of these approaches, particularly when it comes to cooperation, particularly when it comes to, thinking about this progression of approaches from fact checking toward the narrative analysis, toward sort of new artificial intelligence and new technological methods and approaches. What are the ways that we could think about how these sorts of tools might apply in other contexts? So for us, we'll be, for example, doing some work in Latin America this year to better understand, what is the nature of the challenge in that context? How is it that Russian messaging in quite a distinct but very related context where we know that Russia has been very active, particularly since the full-scale invasion, in that information ecosystem to tell a particular story? How can we apply some of these lessons in that context, working through civil society and friendly governments? So, just a couple of words on that.
Thank you all. A very practical question to Olha, I believe. Which artificial intelligence and machine learning tools do you use to carry out analysis of disinformation on social media? Олю, питання до вас. Які технології штучного інтелекту ви використовуєте для аналізу дезінформації в соціальних медіа?
Так, як я розповідала, ми, власне, використовуємо інструменти на основі мови програмування Python, так, і ними користуємося у своїх дослідженнях. Власне, вони дозволяють нам витягувати величезні масиви даних для наших об'ємних досліджень, зокрема, для останнього дослідження, яке я трохи проанонсую, вийде через 2 дні, точніше 24 лютого, і в ньому ми розповімо, як впродовж року Росія виправдовувала свою збройну агресію в Україні, точніше повномасштабне вторгнення. І, власне, ці інструменти дозволяють нам дуже витягувати великі масиві даних. Ми витягнули близько і опрацювали близько 100 тисяч постів. Детальніше про інструменти, з якими ми працюємо, насправді в нас є інформація на детекторі медіа, тобто ми в методології кожного дослідження описуємо, які саме інструменти ми використовуємо, тому що вони різні до різних досліджень, тому я боюся, що фокусуватися зараз на них буде трошечки задовго.
Дякую, Оля. So Detector Media is using Python-based tools to aggregate data and to analyze Russian false narratives. On February 24th, the organization will release its new report focusing on how Russia justified its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Python-based tools helped the organization analyze around 100,000 posts. And for more details and to learn about the methodology, Olha is inviting the audience to check the website of the organization that has all the reports, and they in detail describe all the information. We have a few other questions, and I can combine them maybe in one and ask Veronika and Peter to comment on these. Which Russian disinformation narratives would you say are the most pertinent in Eastern Europe? Are these predominantly circulated in Russian or Eastern European languages? And are there any attempts to engage Russian diaspora in large numbers as communicators to their own population?
Thank you for the questions. I can start. So this question, unfortunately, doesn't have an easy answer because Central or Eastern Europe is not that much of a joint region that would be one answer for the whole region. And I think it's actually one of the things where Russian influence and propaganda is really effective, and what they do well is that they can actually target each country and each society a little differently. They are allowed to do that because they don't have a certain ideology that they spread. They don't have any limits in what they are saying. So they are able to find what are the topics which are, let's say, emotional or already are creating conflicts in society, and which have some kind of or which cause anger in people or worries, and they use these topics to amplify usually already existing tensions and emotions, negative emotions. So, for example, in the Czech Republic, for a long time, in, let's say, 2016 to 2017, migrants from the Middle East were targeted by disinformation quite strongly because a lot of Czech population was worried about migration wave. But later on, these topics changed. Today, obviously, we have probably the biggest focus of disinformation channels on energy prices and the general economic well-being of our citizens. They're attacking the government for helping Ukrainian refugees coming from Ukraine and not helping Czech citizens deal with their housing or energy prices, like I said. So they are always able to find something new or something specific to the given country which will work. That goes also for channels and languages. In the Czech Republic, not that many people speak Russian anymore. So what we see is really pro-Russian and pro-Kremlin disinformation spread in Czech language, be it by officially Russian state channels or be it with local proxies or people who actually really do it from their own will or persuasion. When it comes to Russian diaspora, I think this is an issue very often dealt with, for example, in the Baltic countries. Again, here in Central Europe, there is not that large Russian diaspora, even though there have been cases of small institutions which were targeting Russian minorities, or there are also some activities of the Russian Orthodox Church, which have been spreading disinformation and spreading pro-Kremlin narratives and also undermining democratic system here. But they're compared to the larger scale information operations, those are smaller.
Thank you so much. Peter, would you like to add something briefly? And if not, then I have the last blitz question to the three of you to then pass to John Glenn to close the event.
Let's do the blitz. I don't think I can top Veronika on Central Europe.
Okay, so maybe if we go between three of you and each of you can say just 1-2 words quickly. The words of wisdom, especially for those of you from the region, what else free societies need to be doing to stay ahead of the evolving challenges from Russia in the information domain?
Okay, so I can start one more time. I would say that what we need to do really badly right now is to be more confident in our response. Unlike Russia, we are really always worried that we're going to misstep somewhere, that somebody is going to be worried about censorship or somebody is going to be worried about the freedom of speech. But what we really need to do is step up and be confident in our solutions and implement them properly.
Thank you. Олю, які кроки ще повинні зробити вільні суспільства, аби випередити Росію у дезінформаційних атаках?
Дякую. Мені здається, що такі кроки, як зробила Україна, насправді там в контексті створення Центру протидії дезінформації та Центру стратегічних комунікацій, вони є якоюсь мірою дієві. Звісно, до них є багато запитань і якихось методів, як можна покращити цю роботу, але такі центри, як на мене, мають працювати і, можливо, потенційно вони мали там розвиватися в інших країнах, в різних демократичних суспільствах. Крім цього, мені здається, що нам потрібно схилятися в бік не дебанкінгу, а власне пребанкінгу і працювати на випередження, так, аналізувати різні там масиви медіаконтенту і розуміти, що потенційно може Росія використовувати в своїх дезінформаційних атаках. Так, як приклад, зараз ми аналізуємо, звісно, все, що стосується війни в Україні, і от як приклад те, там, коли Україна подавала заявку на вступ до НАТО, чи там, коли Україна стала кандидаткою на вступ до ЄС. Так, от всі ці речі стали тригерами для російської пропаганди. І насправді аналітики і аналітикині, вони можуть аналізувати медіаконтент і робити для себе такі позначки, що може стати для російської пропаганди тригером для поширення, власне, дезінформації глобально не тільки на українську аудиторію, а й на західній аудиторії. І тут ми маємо думати в контексті пребанкінгу. Нам потрібно пояснювати спершу, так, що це мають робити там і журналісти, власне, і громадянське суспільство. Ми маємо такий пребанкінг заглибитися. Мені здається, це може нам допомогти і буде таким вагомим кроком на випередження.
Дякую, Олю. So from Ukraine example, the creation of the government centers to counter disinformation and to and strategic communication would be a good example to replicate in other countries. But also Olha suggesting to change the focus from debunking to pre-bunking for journalists and civil society to join efforts to identify triggers for Russian propaganda as they analyze events globally. And in Ukraine, such examples would be Ukraine's candidacy status to the EU or application to join NATO. Over to you, Peter, for last words.
I think Olha put her finger on something very important, which is really thinking in terms of political outputs. When at the moment we're not fighting disinformation purely to fight disinformation. We always are. That's the long-term mission of anybody who wants to support a democratic public sphere. But we're in the middle of a war, a very real hot war and a sort of cold war with the West. And we really have to tie everything that we do to making sure both the hot war is won and then the cold war, which is already happening at the same time, but then will probably continue after the hot war, that is won. And that really means sort of, I think, allying all the tools at our disposal and all the political decision-making at our disposal with one aim. There has been this talk, which I think I started meaning one thing by it, to create an information Rammstein, the information version of the Stuttgart cell. It was then reinterpreted by Tkachenko, the Minister of Information, who is using it in a different way that I used it. But such is language, it moves around. And I'm just off to Kiev next week to continue this conversation. But it's whether you take his interpretation, my interpretation, or a third interpretation, the spirit is still there. How do we bring together our efforts in the information space, civil society, investigators, sanctions busters, military information people, and government? How do we bring them together in the way that we've seen hardware come together, the way civil society is fundraising for drones while the army supports the Ukrainian military and so on and so forth? What is the informational bit of that? Information is not the main thing in a war. Yeah, obviously it's won through political decisions and military decisions, but it is a key element in making sure those other things work better. It always has been. That's why information war has always played a very important role from the Trojan horse onwards. It's Odysseus who won the Trojan War and not Agamemnon.
Thank you so much. And now I invite John Glenn, Senior Director of the International Forum for Democratic Studies, to provide concluding comments.
Thank you so much, Irina. And really, thank you to all of our speakers. This is a week when really around the world, many of us are looking at the world and saying, where do we stand today, 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion? What's happened? What were our expectations in reassessing them a year ago? What do we need to do looking forward? And indeed, I think that this conversation has been a really important part of broadening and ensuring that as we look at what needs to happen in Ukraine, indeed, as Peter says, in a hot war, what we can learn from Ukraine. And I think that it's also what we learn from Ukraine directly in a moment, in a certain sense, but also how we look at this challenge more globally. Indeed, even for Ukraine, I would argue that the lessons are not only how to win the war that we're facing right now, but also how to identify lessons to ensure Ukraine's and reinforce Ukraine's democratic future. And I think that what we heard today that's really powerful was a range of pieces there in which we see, wherever you are working on these issues, even if you're not in conflict, often, as we heard from the pieces in Central Europe, other countries are a target of Russian disinformation. And even where you may not be a target for this direct conflict, the kinds of patterns and the lessons that I heard today discussed from our authors and our commentators, I think really highlight the global nature of this challenge. Anybody working with this will recognize the enormous complexity of the challenge as identified here, one happening on multiple platforms, where regimes are flooding the information space with efforts to obscure their actions, deflect responsibility for them, divide and undermine support among democracies, and ultimately undermine trust in democracy. And I think what we heard today that I find really inspiring, and I hope that all of you here will take a chance to look at the report to go into more depth on, is really some ideas about how we stay ahead of what is an evolving challenge. The report highlights civil society, and that might seem counterintuitive, like they would be sort of undermatched in some ways, given the scale and scope of the challenge. But I think the work that both Adam's report, Veronika's piece, and Olha's piece highlight their key adaptations and really opportunities that have global relevance, be they from early preparation to how we deal with the opportunities of new technologies that enable you to deal with the scale and scope of the challenge. Well, I talked about using Python-based software to manage 100,000 posts and materials, which is necessary if you're going to deal with this at the scale of its challenge. So I'm inspired by it today. I think it's such an important contribution to the broader question of where we stand today, 1 year on, but also about how we take these lessons to continue the motivation to go forward. With that, I want to express my profound appreciation to the folks who've joined us today, to our authors, Veronika Víchová, Olha Bilousenko, to Peter Pomerantsev. It's great to have you with us and have your thoughts on this. To my colleague, Adam Fivenson, for his work and leadership, really moving this forward. And to Irina, of course, my colleague, for her moderation efforts here today. This was really a huge group effort. And I feel like the conversation we've had today leaves me richer in thinking about it, but also inspired to be thinking, how do we look at this going forward? And how do we identify the lessons for really to have global relevance as we do so? So thank you all for coming. Please do make sure you check out the full report on our website, ned.org. Check out Just Security, where Adam published a shorter version of this in op-ed form, and there'll be a piece coming out from Detector Media as well that we'll be having on our website. So we look forward to you continuing to engage with us, and thank you all.